My family drugged me, forged my signature, and stole my inheritance. I died with nothing. I woke up on my 18th birthday, 24 hours before they ruined me again. The room smelled of lilies. Not fresh lilies, the kind that grow in gardens that mean something. Funeral lilies. Flowers for the dead. Flowers for me. I lay in a hospital bed that cost more per night than most people made in a year, surrounded by machines that beeped and whirred and pretended to care whether I lived or died. My family stood at the foot of the bed, their faces arranged in masks of grief that didn't quite fit. My brother, Min-hyuk, kept checking his watch. My stepmother, Hyejin, dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief. My father, Park Jin-suk, chairman of Hanjin Group, one of the richest men in the country, stared at the wall behind my head like he was calculating something. He was always calculating. I'd learned that early. When my mother died, when I was 12, when the cancer took her after 3 years of fighting, my father had stood at her funeral with the same expression. Not grief. Calculation. Weighing the cost of her death against the value of her shares. She'd left me everything. Her fortune. Her shares. Her legacy. She'd trusted my father to protect it until I was old enough to take control. He'd spent 16 years finding ways around that trust. Any word from the lawyers? My father asked. Min-hyuk glanced at me, and my closed eyes, my still hands, my body that had stopped fighting hours ago. The transfer documents are ready. We just need the signature. She can't sign anything. Hyejin's voice was soft, practiced. The voice of a woman who'd spent 20 years perfecting the art of seeming innocent. She's barely conscious. She signed the prenuptial agreement. My father's voice was flat. She can sign this. Prenuptial agreement. The words hit me like a slap. I'd signed it 3 months ago, drugged and confused, believing I was securing my future with a man I thought loved me. The man they'd chosen. The man they'd paid to take me off their hands. The man who'd drained my accounts within weeks of the wedding. The man who'd laughed when I asked for help. The man who'd locked me in a guest room when I tried to leave. I opened my eyes. Seo-jun, I whispered. My fiancé. My husband. My jailer. Where is he? My father's face flickered, something like surprise, quickly hidden. Seo-jun is waiting outside. He's been very supportive. Supportive. The word made me want to laugh. Seo-jun had been supportive when my father suggested the marriage. He'd been supportive when the doctor said I was too weak to make decisions. He'd been supportive when the lawyers drafted the documents that would transfer everything I owned into his name. Bring him in, I said. Seo-jun entered like he owned a room. Tall, handsome, dressed in morning black that probably cost more than my first car. He knelt beside my bed, took my hand, pressed it to his cheek with the practiced tenderness of a man who'd learned love as a performance. My love, he whispered. I'm here. I'm not leaving. I let him hold my hand. Let him pretend. Let him think I was still the naive girl who'd believed his lies. The girl who'd thought his smiles were real, his promises genuine, his love anything but a transaction. The lawyers need something, I said weakly. Father said something about documents. Seo-jun's eyes flickered to my father. A look passed between them. Quick, practiced, familiar. The look of men who'd made a deal. It's just some paperwork, Seo-jun said. To make sure everything is taken care of. For when you're gone. For when I'm gone. I nodded slowly. Of course. My father produced a folder. Thick. Heavy. The paperwork they'd been preparing for months. The transfer of my shares, my properties, my inheritance. Everything my mother had left me. Everything my father had promised to protect. He placed it on the bedside table. Opened it to the last page. A pen rested beside it. Waiting. Just a few signatures, my father said. Then you can rest. I looked at the document. My mother's signature was on the first page. The original trust, drawn up when I was born. Her handwriting. Her love. Her legacy. They'd forged my signature on the later pages. I could see it. The shaky letters, the uncertain strokes. They'd practiced. They'd planned. They'd waited for me to be too weak to fight. But I wasn't weak. Not yet. I need to read it first, I said. My father's jaw tightened. Seo Jun's grip on my hand hardened. Min-hyuk stopped checking his watch. Sweetheart, Hyejin said, her voice dripping with false concern. You're exhausted. You can barely hold the pen. Let us handle the details.
No.
I pulled my hand free. Sat up, slowly, painfully, but up. My mother trusted me with this. I'm not signing anything I haven't read. The room went very still. My father's face changed. The mask of grief slipped, revealing something colder underneath. Something I'd seen before in the moments before he made a decision. The same face he'd worn when he told me my mother was dead. The same face he'd worn when he introduced Hyejin as his new wife. The same face he'd worn when he announced my engagement to a man I'd never met. Yuna, he said, using my name like a weapon. You're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you. You're trying to steal from me. I met his eyes. Just like you stole from my mother. Just like you've been stealing since she died. Silence. Then Min-hyuk laughed. Nervous, dismissive. The laugh of a man who'd never been caught. She's delirious. The medication. She's not delirious. I turned to him. You've been embezzling from Hanjin Group for 3 years. Did you think I didn't notice? That I was too busy planning my wedding to pay attention. His face went white. The laugh died in his throat. 7.3 billion won. I continued. Transferred to offshore accounts under your mistress's name. Did you think I wouldn't find the trail? That I was too stupid to follow the money? Min-hyuk looked at my father. My father looked at the floor. Seo Jun stood abruptly. This is nonsense. You're sick. You need to rest. I need to survive. I looked at each of them, my father, my stepmother, my brother, my husband, the people who'd smiled at my wedding and laughed at my funeral. And I'm going to walk out of this hospital. I'm going to live. And I'm going to make sure every single one of you pays for what you've done. My father's face hardened. You won't live through the night. It wasn't a threat.
It was a statement.
A fact he'd already arranged. The doctors he'd paid. The nurses he'd silenced. The machines he'd adjusted. I smiled. We'll see. I died 3 hours later. They'd been waiting for it. The doctors they'd bribed. The nurses they'd threatened. The monitors they'd reprogrammed. My heart stopped at 2:47 a.m. in a room full of people who'd planned it. The last thing I saw was my father's face, watching the flatline with something that might have been satisfaction. Then darkness. Then light. Then my 18th birthday. I woke to sunlight. Not the cold, sterile light of a hospital room. Warm sunlight. Golden.
Alive.
The kind of light that meant something, that meant morning, meant possibility, meant life. I opened my eyes to a ceiling I hadn't seen in 16 years. The pale pink of my childhood bedroom, the same crack in the corner I'd stared at during sleepless nights, the same window overlooking gardens my mother planted, the same curtains she'd chosen, the same books she'd read to me, the same air that still smelled faintly of her perfume. I sat up so fast the world tilted. My body was young.
18. Healthy.
Untouched. No scars from the wedding night. No bruises from Seo Jun's fists. No 4 lines or surgical wounds or the hollow emptiness of a body that had stopped fighting. I stumbled to the mirror. Stared at the face looking back at me.
Park Yuna.
18 years old. Before the wedding. Before the betrayal. Before the hospital. My hair was longer than I remembered. My cheeks were fuller. My eyes were the same. My mother's eyes. Dark, steady knowing. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. Stared at the date. May 3 RD. My 18th birthday. The day before they forged my signature on the prenuptial agreement. The day before they locked me into a marriage with a monster. The day before my father began dismantling everything my mother built. I had 24 hours. I sat on the edge of my bed and let the memories wash over me. The next 16 years laid out in my mind like a map. Every betrayal. Every lie. Every moment I'd spent believing they loved me, trusting they'd protect me, hoping they'd choose me. My father, building his empire on my mother's fortune. Min-hyuk, embezzling millions while pretending to care. Hygiene, smiling at my engagement party while she helped plan my ruin. Seo Jun, whispering love while he drained my accounts.
And me.
The girl who'd signed her life away because she was too scared to say no. The woman who died in a hospital bed, surrounded by the people who'd killed her, holding a pen she was too weak to lift.
Not this time.
I stood, walked to my closet, pulled out clothes I hadn't worn in a lifetime. A simple dress, practical shoes, nothing that screamed heiress or victim. I dressed quickly, quietly, moving through my childhood room like a ghost in her own life. The house was quiet, too quiet. The servants were gone, dismissed early. I remembered now. Tomorrow when I woke they'd be back. But tonight, the house was empty except for my family. I crept downstairs, followed the sound of voices to my father's study. The door was cracked open. I pressed myself against the wall and listened. Min Hyuk was at the desk, papers spread before him, practicing my signature on a scrap of paper. His hand trembled slightly, nervous, inexperienced. This was the first time he'd done something this big. The first time he'd been trusted with the family's secrets. Hygiene stood behind him, watching, correcting his strokes. She always curves the Y, a little loop like a flourish. You're making it too sharp. Min Hyuk tried again. Better? Better. My father's voice came from the corner, calm, approving. He sat in his usual chair, glass of whiskey in hand, watching his son learn to be me. Tomorrow, after she signs the prenup, we move on the shares. The transfer will be complete within the week. And Seo Jun? Hygiene asked. Can he be trusted to? Seo Jun knows what happens if he fails. My father took a slow sip of whiskey. He'll marry her. He'll control her. And when the time comes, he'll make sure there are no complications. Complications, like me, like my mother's legacy, like the truth. I stood in the hallway, listening to them plan my destruction, and felt something I hadn't felt in 16 years. Certainty. I knew every move they'd make, every document they'd forge, every person they'd bribe. I'd lived through it once. I'd died because of it. This time, I was ready. I slipped out of the house before dawn. The streets were empty, the city still asleep. I walked through neighborhoods I hadn't seen in years, past buildings that would be demolished, past shops that would close, past lives that hadn't happened yet. The bank opened at 6 a.m. I was the first person through the doors. The clerk at the front desk was young, new probably, or transferred from another branch. She didn't recognize me. Didn't know she was looking at the heiress to one of the largest fortunes in the country. I need access to the trust accounts under Park Yuna, I said. My mother's estate. Park Minji. The clerk blinked. I'm sorry, miss, but those accounts require dual authorization from. My mother's will specifies that I gain full control at 18. I slid the document across the counter. The original, pulled from the safety deposit box I'd hidden years ago. I turned 18 yesterday. My father's authorization is no longer required. She stared at the will. At me. At the death certificate I'd also brought. I'd prepared for this moment. I'd been preparing for 16 years. Even if I hadn't known it. I need to contact my supervisor.
No.
My voice was calm. Final. The voice of a woman who'd already died once and wasn't afraid of anything anymore. You will process this transfer now. Or I will return with my lawyers and the courts, and this bank's name will be attached to every news story about how Hanjin Group's heiress was denied her inheritance. She processed the transfer. By noon, I'd moved everything. The accounts, the properties, the shares, everything my mother had left me, everything my father had spent 16 years planning to steal. I moved it to institutions he didn't control, accounts he couldn't access, trusts he couldn't break. I sat in a cafe across from the Hanjin Group headquarters, watching the building where my father was preparing to ruin me, and felt something I'd never felt before. Peace.
He didn't know yet.
He was probably still in his study, reviewing the prenup, planning the signatures. He thought I was still asleep, still innocent, still his to control. He had no idea his empire was already crumbling. I ordered coffee, watched the people stream in and out of the building my mother had built. The The building my father had stolen.
The building I was going to take back.
My phone buzzed at 10 a.m. Min Hyuk. I let it ring. At 11 a.m., Hyejin tried. Then my father's secretary. Then my father himself. I let them all ring. At noon, I sent a single message to the family group chat. Asterisk, I'm safe. I'm thinking. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Asterisk. The responses came immediately. Asterisk, Yuna, where are you? Asterisk, Min Hyuk. Asterisk, your father is worried sick. Asterisk, Hyejin. Asterisk, come home. We'll talk. Asterisk, my father. I didn't answer. Instead, I called the one person I knew I could trust. Attorney Kong Soo-jin had been my mother's best friend. She'd known me since I was born. She'd held me at my mother's funeral. She'd warned me, when I was 16, that my father couldn't be trusted with the inheritance. She'd offered to help me move the assets early, to protect them. I'd been too scared to say yes. Too young. Too trusting. Too convinced that my father loved me. This time, I wasn't making that mistake. Yuna? Her voice was shocked when she answered. It's really you? I heard. The engagement, the prenup. I tried to warn you, but your father blocked my calls, and… I know. I gripped the phone tight. I know everything. The prenup. The shares. The plan to transfer everything to Min Hyuk. I know, and I need your help to stop it.
Silence.
Then, what do you need? I need you to file the paperwork. The trust transfer, the property claims, the shareholder notification. Everything that proves my mother's assets are mine, as of today. You turned 18 today? This morning. More silence. When she spoke again, her voice was different.
Stronger.
The voice of a woman who'd spent 16 years waiting for this moment. I'll file it within the hour. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm safe. I'm not going back there. Good. I could hear papers rustling, keys clicking. Don't go back. Whatever happens, don't let them get you alone. They'll try to intimidate you, manipulate you, maybe worse. You know what your father is capable of. I knew. I died because of it. I know, I said. That's why I'm not going back. My father found me at 3 p.m. Not physically, he didn't know where I was. But his rage found me through the phone. Dozens of calls. Hundreds of messages. A slow crescendo of panic as the banks called him, as the lawyers called him, as the shareholders called him to ask why Park Yuna was suddenly asserting control over her mother's estate. I watched it all from my cafe table. Watched my father's world crumble in real time. At 4 p.m., he sent a message that was different from the others. Not panic. Not rage. Something colder. Asterisk, you don't understand what you're doing. The people you're hurting. The consequences. Asterisk. I typed back. Asterisk, I understand perfectly.
You stole from me.
You married me to a monster. You killed me. Those are the consequences. Asterisk. I sent it before I could stop myself. Watched it delivered.
Read.
And waited. The response came in seconds. A call. I let it ring. He called again. 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 On the 7th ring, I answered. Yuna. His voice was strained, controlled, the voice of a man who was used to being in control and had just realized he wasn't. We need to talk. In person.
No.
This isn't a negotiation. This is me telling you no. I kept my voice calm.
Steady.
You've had 16 years to talk. 16 years to be my father. 16 years to protect what my mother left me. You chose to steal instead. We're done talking. If you do this, if you file those papers, there will be consequences.
For you.
For your mother's name. For everything she built. Everything she built is already gone. You tore it down, piece by piece, starting the day she died. I stood, dropped cash on the table, walked toward the door. I'm not trying to save what she built. I'm building something new. You're a child. You don't know how to run a company. You don't know how to manage money. You'll lose everything within a year, and then where will you be? Alive. I stepped out into the afternoon sun. Which is more than you wanted from me. I hung up before he could answer. Seo Jun found me that evening. He tracked my phone. I should have expected that, should have turned it off, but I wanted him to find me. Wanted to see his face when he realized the girl he'd planned to destroy was already gone. He stood in the doorway of the small restaurant where I was eating dinner, looking out of place in his designer suit, looking at me like I was something he'd lost. Yuna. His voice was soft, concerned, the voice he used when he wanted me to believe he cared. I've been looking everywhere for you. Your father's worried. Your brother's worried. I'm worried. I took a bite of my food, chewed slowly, swallowed. I'm fine. You're not answering your phone. You're not coming home. People are saying. He stopped, sat across from me, reached for my hand. I pulled it away. People are saying what? He hesitated. The first crack in the performance. People are saying you've been talking to lawyers, that you're trying to separate your assets, that you're thinking about calling off the wedding. I met his eyes. I'm not thinking about calling off the wedding. Relief flickered across his face.
Good.
Good, because I've already called it off. The relief died. Something else took its place. Something colder. Something I'd seen before, in the moments before his kindness turned to cruelty. Yuna. His voice was different now. Harder. You don't mean that. You're upset. You're confused. Someone's been filling your head with lies. No one's been filling my head with anything. I set down my chopsticks. I know about the deal you made with my father, the shares he promised you, the position on the board, the money he offered to marry me and make sure I never caused trouble. He stared at me. For a moment, the mask slipped entirely, and I saw the man underneath. The man who'd locked me in a guest room, who'd drained my accounts, who'd laughed when I begged for help. Who told you? His voice was barely a whisper. You did. I stood. When you thought I was too weak to fight back. When you thought I was already dead. I walked out of the restaurant and didn't look back. I spent that night in a hotel. A small one. Nothing like the places I'd grown up in. A room with one bed, one window, one door that locked. It was the safest I'd felt in years. I sat by the window, watching the city lights, and thought about my mother. About the night before she died, when she'd called me to her bedside and pressed something into my hand.
A key.
A safety deposit box. The will that would save my life 16 years later. Your father will try to take everything, she'd whispered. Don't let him. Don't let anyone. What I built for you. For you to grow. For you to live. For you to be free. I'd been 12. I hadn't understood. I nodded and cried and promised her I'd be strong. Then I'd spent 16 years being weak. But not anymore. My phone buzzed at midnight. Min Hyuk. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Yuna. His voice was strange. Not angry. Not scared. Something else. We need to meet. Alone. Without father. Why? Because I know things. Things you don't know. About mother. About her death. About what father did after she was gone. My heart stopped. What are you talking about? Meet me.
Tomorrow.
The old house. Noon. Come alone. He hung up before I could answer. I sat in the dark, my mother's key in my hand, and wondered if I could trust the brother who'd practiced my signature. Who'd embezzled from our company. Who'd watched me die. I decided to find out. The old house was the one my mother had grown up in. Small, by our family standards. A place she'd kept after she married. A place she'd visited when she needed to remember who she was before she became Park Jin-suk's wife. Min Hyuk was waiting on the porch. He looked different in the daylight. Younger. More scared. Like the brother I remembered from before the money, before the power, before our father taught him that family meant nothing. You came, he said. You said you knew things about mother. About her death. He nodded slowly. Led me inside. The house was empty, dusty, frozen in time. My mother's books still on the shelves. Her photographs still on the walls. Her presence still in the air, like she'd just stepped out and would be back any moment. Min Hyuk sat on the couch, put his head in his hands. She didn't die of cancer, he said. The words hung in the air. I stood very still. The cancer was real, but it was treatable. There were options. Experimental treatments, specialists, things that could have saved her. He looked up at me. Father didn't pursue them. He told the doctors to let her go. He said it was mercy. My hands were shaking. How do you know this? I found the files. After he promoted me, the medical records, the correspondence, the doctor's notes. She could have lived, Yuna. She could have fought. He chose not to let her. I sat down.
Hard.
Why are you telling me this? Because I've spent my whole life watching him destroy everything he touches. Mother.
You. Me.
The company. And I'm tired. He met my eyes. I helped him. I practiced your signature. I knew what he was going to do. I told myself it was business, that you'd be fine, that you'd forgive me. His voice cracked. I was at the hospital. When you died. I watched him watch you die. And I did nothing. You didn't know I'd die. I knew. Tears streamed down his face. I knew, and I did nothing. And now you're back. I don't know how, I don't understand it, but you're back, and I have a chance to make it right. To tell the truth. To help you destroy him. I stared at my brother. The brother who'd practiced my signature. The brother who'd watched me die. The brother who was crying in my mother's house, begging for forgiveness I wasn't sure I could give. The evidence, I said finally. The medical records. The doctor's notes. Do you still have them? He nodded. Pulled a folder from his jacket.
Thick.
Heavy. The truth my father had buried for 16 years. I took it.
Held it.
Felt the weight of everything it contained. Why now? I asked. Why not before? Why not when I was dying? Because I was a coward. He met my eyes. I'm still a coward, but I'm tired of being his coward. I want to be yours. I didn't forgive him.
Not then.
Maybe not ever. But I took the folder. And I knew, in that moment, that my father was finished. The next week was chaos. I filed the paperwork. I asserted control over my mother's assets. I called off the wedding, publicly, loudly, in a statement that hinted at fraud and coercion without saying the words that would tip my hand too early. My father fought back.
Of course he fought back.
He hired lawyers. He called in favors. He threatened, bullied, bribed. He used every weapon in his arsenal. But I had weapons too. I had the truth. I had the evidence. And I had the one thing he never expected. My mother's will. The document that gave me control at 18. The document he'd spent 16 years trying to circumvent. The document that, combined with Min Hyuk's evidence, would destroy him. I filed the complaint on a Friday. By Monday, the news had broken. Hanjin Group chairman accused of fraud, negligence, conspiracy. Daughter alleges forgery, theft, and the death of her mother. My father called me that afternoon. You've made a mistake, he said. The same words he'd used in my apartment in another life. You think this makes you strong. It makes you nothing. No one will work with you. No one will trust you. You'll be alone. I've been alone, I said, for 16 years, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me. And I survived. I died, and I came back, and I survived. You're insane. Maybe. But I'm not weak. I'm not scared. And I'm not yours anymore. I hung up. My father's empire crumbled faster than anyone expected. The shareholders turned on him. The board abandoned him. The partners he'd spent decades cultivating scattered like rats from a sinking ship. Within a month, he was stripped of his titles, his power, his legacy. The criminal investigation took longer. Years in some cases. But the evidence was too strong, the witnesses too many, the pattern of corruption too clear to ignore. He was convicted of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder. He died in prison 5 years later, alone and forgotten. I didn't visit him. I didn't go to his funeral. I didn't mourn. I'd done my mourning 16 years ago, when I died in a hospital bed surrounded by his lies. I rebuilt Hanjin Group from the ground up. Not the company my father had built, the company my mother had dreamed of. A company that valued people over profit. That invested in communities, in workers in the future. That remembered, always, that money meant nothing if it cost you your soul. It wasn't easy. The board resisted. The shareholders complained. The media called me everything from the princess of revenge to the ice heiress to the woman who killed her father. I didn't care. I'd died once. I'd come back. I'd built something new. What did I have to fear from words? Within 5 years, Hanjin Group was stronger than it had ever been. Within 10, it was a model for ethical business, a beacon for a new generation of leaders who wanted to build instead of destroy. And me? I was Park Yuna, heiress, survivor, the woman who'd taken back what was hers. Min Hyuk spent 3 years in prison. He'd cooperated with the investigation, testified against our father, handed over the evidence that sealed the case. The judge took that into account. The sentence was lighter than it could have been. When he got out, he came to see me. I met him in the same cafe where I'd watched my father's empire crumble 16 years before. He looked older, smaller. The arrogance I remembered had been replaced by something quieter, something that might have been humility. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I don't deserve it. I wanted to see you, to know you're okay. I'm okay. I studied him. Are you? He laughed, a broken sound. I don't know. I'm trying. I'm working. A small business, nothing like what we grew up with. I'm trying to be someone who doesn't hurt people, who doesn't watch people die and do nothing. I thought about the boy who'd practiced my signature, the man who'd watched me die, the brother who'd saved me, in the end, by telling the truth. Min Hyuk. I waited until he met my eyes. I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm glad you're trying. He nodded slowly, stood to leave. At the door, he paused. Mother would be proud of you, he said. What you've built, who you've become. He left before I could answer. I sat in the cafe, watching him walk away, and let myself feel something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Hope. Seo-jun was easier to handle. Without my father's protection, without my money, without the power he'd spent years accumulating, he was nothing. The deals collapsed. The partnerships dissolved. The fortune he'd stolen drained away as quickly as it had come. I didn't destroy him. I didn't need to. He destroyed himself, the way weak men always do when they lose the people they've been using. I heard, years later, that he'd remarried. A woman with money, with connections, with something he could take. I heard, years after that she'd left him, that he'd lost everything, that he was living in a small apartment somewhere, alone, wondering what happened to the life he'd planned. I didn't think about him much. When I did, I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just nothing. The way you feel about a storm that passed, a fire that burned, a wound that healed. He'd been a chapter, a short one, and the book was much longer than he'd ever been. I never married. People found that strange. An heiress, a CEO, a woman who'd rebuilt an empire. Surely she'd want a husband, children, a family to carry on her name. But I'd had a family, and they'd killed me. So I built my own family. The people who worked for me, who believed in me, who helped me build something better. The women I mentored, the young leaders I trained, the generations who would carry forward what I'd started. I built scholarships in my mother's name, hospitals, libraries, places where people could heal, learn, grow, places where the things that happened to me would never happen to anyone else. And at night, when the city lights flickered through my window, I thought about the girl who died in a hospital bed, surrounded by lilies. The girl who'd sighed her life away because she was too scared to say no. She was gone. I'd buried her with my mother in a grave that held both their names. And in her place was someone new. Someone who'd died and come back. Someone who'd learned that the only thing worth inheriting was the strength to build something of your own. To the girl who will read this someday. My name is Park Yuna. I was born the heiress to a fortune I didn't earn. I died because the people who were supposed to love me wanted it more. I came back, not because I was special or chosen or blessed, because I wasn't done, because there was work to do, because the world needed someone to build something better, and I was the only one left who remembered what it felt like to lose everything. If you're reading this, you're probably like me. Someone who's been betrayed. Someone who's been hurt. Someone who's been told they're not strong enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough to fight back. They're wrong. You don't need their permission to be strong. You don't need their approval to fight. You don't need their love to build something of your own. Take what's yours. Build what's yours. Be what's yours. And when they come to you, begging for forgiveness, asking for mercy, wondering how you became stronger than they ever thought possible, remember this. You didn't become strong despite them. You became strong because of them. Because they showed you what happens when you trust people who don't deserve it. Because they taught you that the only person you can rely on is yourself. And because they gave you the one gift no one else could. The chance to prove them wrong. Go prove them wrong. Park Yuna, founder of the New Hanjin Group. Year 20 after the fall.